Hello and welcome to the Permaculture Herbalism segment of the Elder Tree podcast. I am your host, Tonielle Christensen from Earth Mumma, where I teach people how to thrive and get skilled for sustainability. As an educator, kitchen witch, and plant lover, I welcome you to tune in as I interview permaculturalists from around the world. We will learn holistic ways of integrating plants into our homes, gardens, and communities for healing. Together, we will explore the art and science of this regenerative design system and harvest the collective wisdom. Permaculture offers a pathway to empower people to develop their lifestyles and landscapes. So let's discover how to grow and know plants with a purpose. Okay, well, welcome to our first ever episode of the Permaculture Herbalism segment of this podcast. I am your host, Tonielle Christensen, and I am interviewing myself today. So when you listen to our other episodes, you'll get the flow that for this first launch for September, for spring 2022, you'll be hearing from each of us, the 4 segments, just to sort of learn a little bit so we can share with you who we are and give you a bit of an introduction into our lives and why we're doing this, our podcasts. And then moving onwards, we're going to be interviewing some really incredible people. So let's begin. What I'm going to do with this podcast today is just go through the flow really of questions that I will be asking our interviewees. So the intention for this particular podcast or this segment of Permaculture Herbalism is really to share holistic ways so that people can integrate plants into their homes, into their gardens, and also communities for healing. So with permaculture, we're going to be exploring the art and the science of this regenerative design system. So a bit about me. I have a beautiful little garden in Kuranda, Jabugai country in far north Queensland. I have grown up in North Queensland most of my life in Townsville, and not just little Townsville, but just on the outskirts in Rupertswood or along the Alice River. And it was a little rural bush community with I never had horses. All my friends had horses. I'd visit them. We had a pony club and we used to do boot scooting down at the community hall, of all things, so bush dances and the likes. I was born in 84, so that brings me to 39 years wise coming up. And apart from living in that rural area on the weekends and school holidays, I grew up in a little beach house community at Black River, just north of Townsville. So, yeah, pretty much couldn't wait to leave when I reached 18 and I got a wonderful job working on expedition boats out from Cairns. So I relocated up to further North Queensland and did many stints traveling the Coral Sea and up through the Kimberley region, from Darwin to Broome, itineraries from Darwin to Broome. We took the boat down to Tasmania, across to New Zealand, up through Melanesia and Papua New Guinea. So I really got to experience life on the water for many of my years in the 20s. And then I became extremely grounded upon the earth, relocating to Cairns to Kuranda to have my first born child. I am a stepmama of a beautiful daughter, and then birthed my own daughter at home in Kuranda. And then in between all of that, I did travels overseas, backpacking through Nepal and India, Nepal, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia. Did some backpacking through New Zealand as well. I lived in Melbourne for 6 months until I got really cold and couldn't handle the winter. I did a snow season in Jindabyne, lived in Brisbane. So I've done a bit of living and moving around until I finally put my roots down here in Jabberkai country and really sunk my teeth into permaculture. So my first question really is, why is permaculture an important aspect of your life? So why is it an important aspect of my life? To start with, really, I stumbled across it. I didn't really know that there was even a thing called permaculture. I was living my 9-to-5 rat race job in Townsville and drinking, would you believe it, 5 coffees a day because I was rather... my adrenals were exhausted, not that I was aware of that at the time. Working 70 hours a week in a real estate job it was sort of the first career move I made after all of my years of traveling and working in hospitality. I started a career because I was inspired by some, like my friends from school's mum was doing it. It's a really beautiful company. They were very family friendly and gorgeous people. But what I came to realize in that role was it was all happening when the global financial crisis happened, and selling houses for people was something that they were doing not because they wanted to, but because they had to. So there was a lot of emotion and challenge around those transactions. And I guess that was the learning or realization of the type of person that I am, and it became more of a role in counseling and had a lot of people crying on my shoulder and holding space for a lot of people through challenging times, which was an easy extension of who I am, but also it did take its toll, and the role really required many hours and being on the phone all the time, something that I wasn't quite used to. And yes, the coffee and just eating unhealthy. All my life I had troubles with allergies, hay fever especially, lethargy, tiredness. I had diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome in my late teens in high school, which took me out of school for 2 terms. So that I did have these underlying health things going on, but never really an awareness of what the true cause was. And I think I was a bit disheartened by the GPs going to the doctors all of the time and just being told, here, take these hay fever pills and snort this hay fever. It was just all of these like prescriptive things to do, but never really looking at what was causing it. Until I got quite ill. I was struggling with each month when my moon time would come around, it was really quite challenging, and I was living with a friend and she said that this isn't normal, you really should get this checked out. So I was introduced to an amazing doctor. I'm not sure if they're still there, Dr. Rodney Mullins in Townsville. He was a GP, but he also was Chinese medicine doctor, so he had kind of the east and west combo happening, and it's a really nice mix. And he was the first person I sat down to who really just sat and listened, asked me a lot of questions and listened, and we did a consultation for about 40 minutes, and he really explored a lot of things, my lifestyle, my work habits, my hours, my stress levels, and in particular, what I was eating. Oh my gosh, like diet really has an effect on our health. And that was at, I think, age 26. So removing dairy and wheat from my diet gave me a whole new lease on life. and it also perked my interests and curiosity into the food system. So that was kind of where it all began. Once I started looking at, in Townsville, most of the food is grown in the Bowen Air sort of basin south of Townsville. To my surprise, it was all being sent down thousands of kilometers to Brisbane and even further to be separated and resold and reshipped or travelled in various forms, a lot of road travel here in Australia, back up to Townsville, to the grocery stores to be purchased. And at the time, there really wasn't much in the way of like a local market for farmers market in that sense to buy direct from the farmers. And there wasn't really any health shops around. So that kind of birthed Food for Thought with a lovely woman, Diana Condolis, who came up from Sydney and started the conversation. At the same time, I had joined the local Townsville permaculture group, because if you start searching health and well-being and food systems, permaculture is certainly something that pops up in that search. And that was really a transformative time in my life, to connect with my tribe, I suppose, and be having these meaningful conversations around our food system, the connection between our health, how to, the accessibility, like how could we actually become activists in a way of not just talking about the problems, but actually finding solutions and bringing what we wanted, which was access to local fresh food, into our communities. And permaculture really was the key to bringing it into the garden. So I went on to do my PDC, which is a permaculture design certificate, majorly inspired by my now partner, Blake Hudson, the Earth Artisan. He went along and did it and came back. He was in a rental, and I just remember him going to his house, and he was making compost on cement in the very large cement driveway, and he had veggies growing out of bathtubs, and he was growing on cement with no deep gardens and mulch and hay. And there was vegetables coming out of this like soil matter that he was creating, and composting all of his food scraps. And it seems so normal to me now, but back then it was like, wow, this guy's doing something really exciting, very different. And he was just in his zone. He was having a great time and happy to share, and really kept talking about this amazing course that he did. So I booked in, and with my busy schedule, I had to cancel or reschedule 3 times, and I finally got to it the 3rd time. My teacher was Darren Doherty, so he has Regen Ag in Australia. He's helping a lot of broad-scale farmers implement larger regenerative systems with holistic management and keyline farming. Really, really exciting work in Australia and around the world. And it was done up here with Kim and Georgie Cruz at Free Range Permaculture. They've gone on to actually do work in the holistic management, and with Darren Doherty onwards and upwards. So we have become the permaculture design course providers in far north Queensland now. But I'll fill you in on the journey between then and here, and how we got to be in that space. In that particular course, I studied alongside Costa. You might all know Costa from Gardening Australia and Costa's Gardening Odyssey, and some other really special people. And yeah, it was, they call it putting your permy goggles on, and I can attest to that after witnessing the transformation of my experience in that course, but also of all of my students that come through, even my 2-day workshop. But the 10-day PDC really is a life-changing paradigm shifting experience. And so with that knowledge and new life skills, I went home and just started growing in my garden. I had a 800 square meter block on Garden Street in Mundingborough, and Blake also had a property called the Permipad in Aikenvale, not far from each other, along the beautiful Ross River. We used to bike ride to each other's house, and I think those two places really became little sites, activation sites, where our community grew in the food for thought and permaculture ways. Became an activist. I worked for North Queensland Conservation Council, doing things like organising marches for coal seam gas and doing screen filmings of really important and potent environmental issues at the time. So it was a really, leaving hospitality and real estate and entering into the environmental, I suppose it's political as well, but just having these really meaningful conversations around what was happening in terms of health and environment and where we wanted to take it. And really, it was amazing because it's hanging out with people who are solution focused. They're willing to sit with and look at the very important and challenging issues with the world. And there's a thing called deep ecology, which is, just looking at what that effect has on our spirit. When we look at the shadow side of things, and if we actually sit down and receive and acknowledge the state of what industry is doing to our environment, which is completely unnecessary. There is certainly ways for us to meet our needs, food, fiber, medicine, lifestyle, technology, all of these things in a way that can be regenerative. The solutions are there. So when we see these kind of very unfavorable practices happening, it can be challenging. So it's deep ecology is a way to really acknowledge and process that, and that's what these communities or groups, organizations, there's space for that to connect in that way, but also to get our hands in the earth and actually do what we can in our own homes, gardens, and within our communities. And if we all did that, it would just make a big difference onwards and upwards. We don't need to wait necessarily for industry to change. We can vote with our fork, and we can do things like divest, divest, which is diverting our money and investments into people and places that are doing less desirable and less innovative work, and into amazing organizations and social enterprises that are leading the way. Anyway, bringing it back to that question, why is permaculture an important aspect of my life? It's because it transformed my life and gave me a really beautiful way or mindset of seeing the world and engaging, and my health really has really improved. My social networks have improved, and I now live in a beautiful home that we've been building, and I have a beautiful garden that I can just go out and pick organic produce from. And my livelihood now is mainly centered around teaching permaculture, and I just have amazing, beautiful clients and people that come into my life. So that's why it's so important. And because I touched on it, but because it's solutions based, so I feel like it is going to be and is being adopted by many people around the world in many forms. It's not just gardening. There's that, if you look at the permaculture flower that David Holmgren put together, we have the ethics and design principles at the core. But we have all these domains of society, and the physical and the invisible realms that we can be redesigning to meet our needs in that sort of regenerative outcome. So people care, earth care, and equality or fair share. And that's, from people usually think of permaculture in terms of nature stewardship, land and nature stewardship, which is a huge aspect because it's, meeting our needs with food, and we're so intricately connected with the land. But our buildings as well, how we build and what we build with. And then there's tools and technology. We have land tenure and community governance. Social permaculture is something I'm really passionate about as well, and I've done some amazing training with Robin Clayfield, who I'd love to have in this segment one time, so stay tuned for that one. But dynamic governance and group decision making, all of these things, there's permaculture ways of actually coming to decisions and working with groups to meet our goals and our aims that leaves everyone feeling regenerated, and it's a harmonious experience. We've all been in that. Maybe you've been in that situation where you've worked with groups or been in not-for-profits or even in your own work organization, and it can be really challenging working with people. So there are processes within that we can design into working with people that makes it harmonious and regenerative. And there's also finance and economics. There's also our health and spiritual well-being, and education and culture. So those are, the different domains I just touched on then. And we always start with ourselves, our zone 00, our inner landscape, our thoughts, our behaviors, our beliefs, our own personal patterns to really observe and interact with, and then implement the principles to create change. And then, beginning with our, what's in our house and how are we designing our home. And then our zone 1 is what are those elements for meeting our needs, existing just around our house. How are we feeding ourselves? How are we dealing with our waste and closing the loop? Do we have worm farms, and are we composting? Are we growing our own herbs and salads? And the list can go on. So then we've got our zone 2, which is that area of our garden and our home that we might visit maybe every once a day or once every second day. It's not something we engage with constantly, but what can we put in those places to really improve our lifestyle and have a positive environmental impact? And it goes onwards and outwards. So zoning is a really big part of any of the design process, really. So then zone 3 is somewhere we might visit 3 to 4 times a week. Zone 4, maybe once a month. And zone 5 is untouched, it's nature. We don't engage with it. We just ensure that it's protected. So if we live in urban environments, we really might just have a zone 1 or 2, maybe a zone 3. If you don't yet really engage in your outside environment. But look, if you have a permaculture garden, you're extending your living space out into the garden, and your lifestyle really expands because it's not just existing in the things that can happen within the doors and the windows under the roof. Something to think about there. So the second question is, how do you integrate plants specifically from a herbalism perspective into your home, garden and community? So for me, plants are a huge aspect because that's what we're really putting into the ground when we're doing permaculture from the nature stewardship aspect. But what I really what I have found really interesting is I used to look at a plant from the perspective of, hey, oh, this is an orange tree, and or a banana tree, and I get fruit from it. Great. But there is so much else going on with the plant kingdom and these beings, and they play a huge role in terms of ecosystem functions. So a banana we use as a support species quite a lot here in the tropics. And yes, it gives us bananas. That's always exciting. And there's so many different varieties, not just the Cavendish ones that you get at the supermarkets. One of my favorites here is our dwarf Cavendish, which came from my grandmother. I've got a whole lot of plants that have heaps of meaning that came from her, and I will be sharing with you today about the elderberry tree, being that's my sort of must have in a permaculture garden, and we are the Elder Tree podcast, so I thought it was quite fitting. But plants, yeah, I mean, I have so many outside of my garden. People are like, wow, you even have plants inside your house. And I do. We have plants that just, oxygenate the house and hang because they're just so beautiful. From a high bookshelf that I don't want to put books on because it's too far to reach, but the plants sit up there and look pretty, and taking carbon dioxide, just purify the air really. And I have brahmi in my house that I pick and eat a little bit each day when I do the dishes. But you'll find jars of water and plants that I harvest from outside, like a lot of the greens, and I'll bring in once I've picked the leaves off to use, and I'll stick them in the water and new roots will grow. And it's just a really simple way to propagate. I can't bring myself to throw the stems into the compost container because new plants can grow from them. We also do a lot of sprouting, so that's sort of in-house. It sits on the deck, but you can grow gardens in your house, grow food in your house simply by sprouting. But walking down my front stairs or my back stairs, I've got perennial tropical greens and salad bars growing, tomatoes, a herb spiral of herbs, a vertical garden with herbs and flowers that can be eaten. At the moment I've got snow peas going crazy with our current sort of winter spring. Spring's my favorite time of year in the tropics. So yeah, plants have really been, in terms of herbalism, there's so many ways to use plants, and that's what I really learned is that, okay, well, there's this whole design aspect of how to put things in the right place at the right time of year to have an efficient and abundant garden. But it wasn't until I really started, I was introduced to Isabel Shepherd, who was a herbalist in Australia here. She lived in the Sunshine Coast, I believe, and she wrote an amazing book called How Can I Use Herbs in My Daily Life? And this became a bit of a Bible for me because all of the plants that she has listed are sort of tropical and subtropical, and I can grow where I live. So that became a book that, has lots of notes in it and bookmarks, and I've got it out all of the time. I still use it just to come back. I think I know a plant and then I'll just revisit it. Oh wow, there's more different things I can use it with. So I guess plants, she says to know them is to grow them. To grow them is to know them is to use them is to love them, and then happily herbs become your way of life. That is a quote from Bertha Rappert, and Isabel Shepherd has it in the opening page of her book. And this is my desire for you, is what Isabel says. And that's my desire for you too, once you begin your permaculture journey, is really to pick plants as your ally and start off slow. They're like people. We build relationships with them, and it takes time. I'm still gaining more information and receiving more embodied knowledge from each plant as I use them. So bringing them into my kitchen, and just, like comfrey, for example, has so many ecosystem services in my garden, from improving the soil to I put it into my weed tea to ferment as a lovely, easy to make fertilizer. I feed them to my worm in the worm farms. I just lay them down, the leaves straight around my my plants, just as a living, like I pluck it and use it as a mulch to feed certain plants. I look at them, if I get a message from them that they're looking a bit sick or they need some energy, I'll put some leaves around it. But yeah, just, bringing it into the house and implementing it or integrating it in a way of herbalism. It's a practice that we do regularly, to bring in the roots, the leaves, and aloe vera, and mix it in the mortar and pestle, and make band-aids, or put it as a cover over our skin if we've hurt ourselves, otherwise known as nip bone. But if we've got sore, we even use it for sore tendons. If we've had boils in the past, one of the summers, boils were getting around, and so we even applied it over boils, and it made a huge difference. Brought the boil out and made things, healed it. But I made chickpea fritters with the leaves the other day. And so, it's just learning from other people and practicing these things. It's like it's been sitting in my cells, and I'm sure for others, there's like a innate wisdom that goes back a long time, and it's been forgotten. And so just doing these things really is, it's like coming home, and it's like a remembering. And I'm not sure if you were, as a child, played witches and made concoctions and things like that. It was certainly part of my childhood. And as a grown adult now, and actually doing it with some knowledge of how these plants work, it's very, very empowering. So yeah, I suppose my home and garden are very connected. Community-wise, I share plants when people come over, and happy to share. I do a one-day workshop at my house for how to cook and prepare many of the tropical wet season edibles. So I guess that's my way of giving back to community and sharing plant herbalism in that way. And moving on, because I got so much to say. The third question I'll be asking our interviewees is, do you have a favorite plant that you recommend as a must-have? And do you include it in your home and garden, and why? So for me, it's a hard one. I'm sure everyone will say there's so many plants. But I think today I just touched on comfrey, and that's very much used a lot in my garden for many reasons. But elderberry really has a special place in my heart. So, and being that it's the Elder Tree podcast, I thought it would be a really good one. It is a plant ally. So when Twiggy said I'm doing the Elder Tree not-for-profit, it really kind of pulled one of my heartstrings. It was like, "Ooh, tell me more. How can I be part of it?" But the elder tree, I had started to learn about. It was something that people talked about in a mysterious sort of way when I first joined the permaculture group in Townsville. And it was a group that was really made up of a lot of wise women and wise men in their later years, and a bit of a tea and bicky group. gorgeous people. But when we came in, we were like, let's get a community garden going. Like, let's do perma blitzes at each other's houses. And they were like, great, guys, go for it. You youngins, get amongst it. And so that's what we did. We activated a community garden at the Railway Estate Community Garden. And so it was like really, people were happy to help and share, and bringing, like plants just started arriving, and that was the way I was starting to learn about plants, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I was kind of used to the food plants that were available at the vegetable shop at the supermarket, right? And then it's like, oh wow, there's like how many hundreds of species of varieties of tomatoes, and just like my world opened up, just understanding that around seed savers and the heirloom varieties of all of the annual plants, and how we're really, you get like one or two varieties at the supermarket where there's so hundreds of types that we can start growing, and that can have better taste and amazing colors and shapes. But perennial plant wise, I didn't even know the difference between perennials and annuals. So when I was like, oh wow, these plants that you just put in the ground once and they just keep growing and expanding, and you can propagate them and share them with other people. So I was starting to learn there about these new types of amazing tropical fruits and berries and herbs and ground covers and bushes and everything. How to build a food forest with all these perennial tropical plants that I'd never seen before. But elderberry just never showed up. And so I kept looking out. And then one particular day I went to visit my grandmother, who was an avid gardener as well. And at the front of her stairs, facing her stairs, was this bush that I'd seen there for years. But it was covered in these lacy white flowers, clusters of these flowers that sort of had umbrils and fanned out. And when you look really closely, each individual little white flower is a little white star, and it's unmistakable. It was like, this is it. This looks like an elderberry flower. And so I spoke to my grandma. She's like, yeah, it's the first time I've seen it flower, because I usually just cut it back. She was like really good with secateurs, and she just loved to keep everything in form and shape, like a topiary queen. But she was getting older, and she was starting to let things go. And luckily, the elderberry had time to get a bit taller and flower. And she explained that the gentleman across the fence saw it and said, oh, we have elderberries in New Zealand where I'm from. I haven't seen one for years. Do you mind if I harvest it? I make a beautiful cordial with it, and I'll make you some. So we went upstairs, and she had this elderflower cordial that he had made, and we tasted it, and it was delicious. And I went and picked up did some research and figured out, oh, it's really easy to propagate. I can just cut a stem and pop it in some water and let the roots grow, or in some soil and keep moist. And so I'm pretty sure, like, I have spread and shared that plant with so many different people. And yeah, Grandma had been given it as a plant many moons beforehand. Didn't know, like the person didn't say it's an elderflower, it's just pretty. So it's really important to sort of, to hand over a plant when you're sharing it, and just give the story and tell people, share what it is, so that there's this amazing resource that had been there pretty much underneath our nose, like it was under the stairs. And yeah, just waited. The time appeared for it revealing itself, or us noticing it. And so I brought it to Kuranda. I lived in a few different properties before we started building our place here, and Biola. So I planted it in different places along the way. And then when we got here, I put it into our garden, and I guess it's a really good windbreak and edging plant. It's like a fedge, a hedge that you can forage from and eat, a food hedge. So we fedged it around our Zone 1 garden, in the line from our house to the outdoor shower, which existed at the back of Blake's parents' house. So we all cohabit the same property. And at the time, like, we literally started with a caravan and a little roof over the top with a deck out the front. 2 adults, 2 girls, 2 children. And we, it's been a journey. We have milled trees on site and had a gentleman come with his Lucas saw and cut the trees into it became wood then, timber, and we were able to cut them into sizes we needed to build our first stage, which was our living dining area. And, opened up the space just a little bit around our home, especially on the northeast side, and let in some light and air. And then we've been replanting since. And so that direction, we had no bathroom. So we were using the outdoor shower at the back of their property. We needed privacy, and elderberry grows really fast. There are, I think, around 26 different species of elderberry. I think we have the Sambuca nigra is the one that most people know about. It grows sort of more in temperate climates, like a big tree. I think we have the elderberry canadensis, which has more of a suckery. It's got a sucker characteristics where it pops up and spreads around the initial planting, but grows like a bush more so here in the tropics. Definitely water loving. I find mulberry does the same. When I look at mulberry trees down south, they grow like big trees with like trunks, whereas the elderberry and mulberry up here is more of a bush. It's got much more thinner branches that kind of willow out and down. But nevertheless, they grow well and abundantly and produce a lot of fruit. So I have used the elderberry from a herbalism perspective. Each year I collect the berries as they become ready, because the plant will actually be flowering and producing ripe berries at the same time. So you've got the flower to the new berries, which are green, which are a bit toxic. You don't eat them at that stage, but when they are juicy, dark, purple berries, you can squeeze them and they make a beautiful purpley pink dye, and the birds are loving them. That's when they're ripe. So I'll just grab some, cut them, put them into a bag and freeze them, and just keep adding to that freezer bag. And that makes it really easy to then, when you're ready to prepare and cook them, you can just use a fork and pull the frozen berries away from all of the stems, because you don't want to use the stems, and it prevents a big mess, because if you're just pulling off the ripe berries, you just get purple dye everywhere. So there's a little tip. Actually, I have some blogs on my website, earthmumma.co.co, about the recipes, and a bit of a story about elderberry there if you wanted to read on that and get some more information and the recipe. But yeah, I make a sort of cough syrup for the flu season, winter each year, and I do believe that helped us a lot when we did contract the flu, the pandemic flu that went around. We spent 4 days in bed, up on the 5th day, and then back to normal. It did take 2 weeks really to get our energy levels back, but with the herbal antivirals we were taking and the elderberry cough syrup, which is literally, I did this time add clove and cinnamon when I boiled it down, and we use a really gorgeous local honey to make the cough syrup. So that's a big part of our life, is utilizing the berries for that, and then using the flowers as decoration. They're edible, so putting them in on cakes that I make, I love making cakes for people for their birthdays, so that's a decoration, and salads as well. But yes, of course, the elderflower cordial. I like to put the lime leaves, kaffir lime leaves in there as well, and we grow limes on the property, so that all goes in beautiful mix. So that's how we use it for ourselves, but all parts of the elderberry can be utilized. They say the elderberry gives freely its flowers and its berries. But if you were to utilize the stems or the trunk, you would, it has been used to help induce vomiting. So if there's ever a need for that, if you have poisoning on any level and you need to bring that up, you can make a decoction. But of course, I am not a qualified herbalist. I am a home herbalist and I practice on myself. So you should always get professional advice. But that's just some insight into how it's utilized in that sense. But from the garden perspective, it creates its biomass. It is like you put it in, it grows fast. So it's used a lot for chop and dropping. I must say though, in the wet season up here, if I was to chop and drop the stem, it would literally grow roots lying in the earth and a whole new plant will grow. So I really chop it back and then put it under cover, like under our deck, and let it dry before putting it out as as stems to use in a compost or as a chop and drop. Otherwise I'll just have elderberries growing in all sorts of places I don't particularly want them. But yeah, use it as a windbreak. So when you're doing it from a design perspective, you can create a lovely privacy, green walls, and windbreak. So utilizing it on the edges of your zone 1, zone 2 and zone 3 gardens. The birds love it, so it's nice to have near the house so that you can see and watch all of the beautiful bird species in your area come in. It is fodder and habitat for many animals. Bees, oh my gosh, you can see so many bees buzzing around. So we have a native beehive in our vegetable garden. We found it in a log not far from, in our garden still. So we moved it into the veggie garden just to help with pollination and because it was close to the elderberries and elderflowers. So definitely helps feed the bees. And I also put it in the weed tea, but a great living mulch as well, so the leaves will just pop back and grow back really quickly. Right now I've got beans along a trellis that have just continued to grow and they're growing up, so I'm literally harvesting beans out of the elderberry because the vine's gone in through it. That's called stacking, the stacking principle in permaculture, but the plants did it themselves. I just observed that it was doing it. It wasn't my initial intention. So those are all sort of the practical sides of elderberry, but it is known as quite a mystic, magical plant. And you can certainly, I invite you to now jump on and do some research and learn. There's a lovely website called The Druid's Garden, and she shares a lot about the magical side of elderberry. Men used to walk, or people would not walk past, they say in folklore days, walk past without taking their hat off and acknowledging this specific tree because of its magical properties. And it was known as a protector, so people would always have one around their house. It was sort of superstitious not to bring the elder into the house or burn the wood. You wouldn't use it as firewood. Definitely a musical tree. They say the plant has a song, and it's also known as the pipe tree. So you can when you cut it, Blake has actually made a pipe out of it. It's a beautiful little pipe he carved, and the stems have like a thicker outer layer, and in the center of it, it becomes like a soft plinth. So you can let it dry and then just push the inner circle out of it, and then you've got a pipe. So it was used to make flutes and apparently pan flutes and pipes. So really revered in that aspect of it creates a way for people to make music. And yeah, the flowers themselves look beautiful. You could just tell that fairies would want to hang out, and it was known as the queen of the fairies in the fairy realm. So yeah, do your own research, check it out. I think I've given you plenty of reasons why it should be used in a home garden. And the final question, or fourth question is, can you share an example of when you utilized plants to improve your health, and what was that experience? Going back, it was quite an unconscious experience, really, but when I touched on having chronic fatigue in my late teens, and that I was so out of it and exhausted and tired and brain fogged that I really was in the care of my family. But my mum was continuously calling the school saying, look, she's not well enough to come back yet. And one particular day, the lady who worked there at the school said, look, this has been going on for months, and I think perhaps my son had a similar kind of thing, and it turned out to be chronic fatigue, and maybe we should get that checked out. So we got the diagnosis, even though it's not really, it's like a syndrome. So it's just a collection of all different kinds of symptoms. They can't really say why it happens from that sort of GP medical expertise. But what she did was go to a naturopath, and he recovered, and so she basically put us on the path to finding health. And so we connected with this local naturopath, and she gave me a heap of, all I remember was that they were it just tasted like dirt. It was like watery brown herbs, and I just had to drink it every day. And I have no awareness even to this day of what the concoction and herbs were. It was cold, it was coming out of the fridge, I was taking tinctures as well, and at the end of the day, my strength came back and I became healthier. And it's been a lifelong lesson, really, to be aware of, not burning out and just really look after myself. So I am grateful for the experience. But that was the first time that I realized, oh, wow, the doctors couldn't help me, but the plants, the local naturopath gave me these weird plants and I got my health back. So that was a seed that was planted that long ago. But now, yeah, like we use aloe vera regularly because of the sun, and also it's really cooling on the system. Elderberry, of course. But culinary wise, I make a lot of herbal teas from different herbs in my garden, but it's a very intuitive experience, and it's just try out new thing. Walk out and I just feel into, I might try that today. Like yesterday I put together dill, tarragon and cranberry hibiscus leaves and made up a hot pot of tea. And yeah, I mean, I'm not fully aware of exactly all of the everything that it's doing to my body. I know there's lots of trace minerals, and there's things happening from a health perspective, because so many of the plants that you can eat daily are tonics, and they're just tonifying our organs. But I haven't really had the flu for years. I haven't been to the doctors. Okay, here's one. When I birthed my daughter Nova at home, I had a midwife supporting me, and when I birthed her, I got out of the water and I laid down and had a nice cup of tea, and had learned to put her to my chest and did the breastfeed. Started learning how to breastfeed for the first time. And probably 20 minutes to half an hour had passed, and my midwife said, I think, like, are you still having contractions? It's time to release the placenta. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's right, I've got this other birth to do. And the contractions really had stopped. And so we waited a little bit longer. And so then I had kind of got to that 40 minutes to 50 minutes time. And And so what I did have there in preparation was some tinctures, some blue cohosh, and what was the other one? It's slipping my mind right now, but I had a combination of two different herbs in concentrated tincture form, specifically for, or black, maybe it was black cohosh, for this, for helping either bring on labor or help with the contractions. So, and I took that, and within 10 minutes, the contraction started again, and I was able to release Nova's placenta in a really, at home in a really lovely way. We did a lotus birth, so we had a special little towel bag that was gifted to us, and she kept her placenta with her for a couple of days until it naturally fell off. But yeah, so in that instance, I had a complete natural birth, and I utilized herbs to be able to, not have really intense things like syncytocin, and to just self-administer at home under the guidance of a professional and have a very beautiful birth. So I invite you to look at ways that you can implement or integrate those kind of, what do you need in your life, and what plants can actually potentially help you with that. Learning a lot. I'm teaching permaculture to families through the Nature Kids program, and one of the lessons is doing an edible weed walk and just revisiting dandelion. That plant is amazing. I just went and got a heap of seed so I can plant it all through my garden as well, because the tonifying, like, it's a tonic, and what it does for our liver, kidneys and gallbladder, it's amazing. And it's just, it's also known as Prince of Paupers. It's like this very common looking plant that we all love. If you've ever had the chance as a childhood to blow the little puffballs off into the distance, those seeds, but it's got a royal, like it's of high value in terms of what it can do to support us in our life. So look into that too. All right, final question. What is alive and thriving in your life right now? Well, this podcast, this is the first one, so I'm really looking forward to exploring permaculture herbalism with all the amazing people around the world that have wisdom to share. So this is a whole new experience for me that I'm excited to be part of. Also, sending good intentions and prayers to the Elder Tree not-for-profit to see that spring up and become what it's intended to be within the North Queensland community around bringing herbs back to the people and supporting the educators and the wise people in our community to be able to share that wisdom, and for events and just bringing community together. So that's an exciting thing. Yeah, so looking to help out with some events like film nights and stuff like that, film events, and just about to have a lovely week off on Magnetic Island. That's a very special place to me, and we have an annual holiday there just to really release all of the tech, detox, and just get back to swimming in the salty waters, which I don't feel comfortable doing up here in far north Queensland with crocs around. And yeah, just finalizing up my online program, really. So that's alive and thriving in my world, and I put that back on you. So what is alive and thriving in your life right now? Can you bring that up to the surface and really acknowledge what you're focusing on in your life? And yeah, permaculture, community, plants, people, my workshops have all been something that's been filling my time and my heart a lot lately. So is there anything else that I want to share with our listeners about permaculture and herbalism? I feel like I have rambled on much more than I thought I would. So I will close it here, and I just want to invite you to come back and join us in the future episodes. There's so much excitement happening. You'll be able to learn about self-care with Jessica, and sacred herbalism with Stephanie Hazel, and meet other herbal educators with Twiggy. So much goodness to come. All right, so just listen to the outro. You can learn about how you can be part and join us in this elder tree journey. Thank you all so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you in one way or another in the future. The Elder Tree is a not-for-profit organisation that is in the beginning stages of creating a grassroots herbal education centre and healing sanctuary in the Atherton Tablelands of Far North Queensland. To find out more, go to theeldertree.org and follow the journey on Instagram and Facebook. You can also donate to the Elder Tree via our podcast channel on Anchor or via the website. If you like the episode, we'd love you to subscribe. And if you know who we should interview next, drop us a line. See you next month, and in the meantime, may you grow them to know them and be blessed with good health and many plants.